Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project with E.C. Synkowski. My name is Patrick Cummings, and every episode I have the distinct privilege of presenting EC with a question on subject matters that range from nutrition to fitness to the choices we can all make to live a healthier, more functional life. By exploring both the principles at play and the actions worth carrying out as a result, we aim to get you thinking, get you moving, and get you taking more consistent steps toward optimizing your well-being. Thank you as always for tuning in. How are you, EC?
Awesome. Thank you.
Today, we're diving into part 2 of a conversation we started in our last episode. We started talking about protein digestion and absorption, and today we're going to take it to its logical end and talk about protein timing and something called muscle protein synthesis.
Yeah.
And I'm just glad I pronounced that correctly.
We can say MPS from here on.
MPS, that's what we'll do from the rest of the episode. MPS, so I can avoid saying muscle protein synthesis. Before we do, and we told folks about this in the last episode as well, but Fast Approaching is your next masterclass. Tell folks what the masterclass is and what they can expect if they jump into it.
Yeah, it's kicking off in 4 days from the release of this podcast, and it is starting to do, well, that Sunday that we kick off, January 3rd, is the 8-week program that is within the masterclass. So the masterclass contains all of my general principles, which kind of give you this framework for understanding nutrition. But then the actual how-to, like, let's go to the kitchen and make this work. We can go through that together as a group. And there's a live Facebook group to help with that, where I'm there answering questions every day. I'm also going live about once a week. And so that program is kicking off Sunday, January 3rd. And so if you want to get your nutrition sorted in 2021, I would suggest you join.
I would like to get everything sorted for 2021. There's a lot of things that need to be sorted in 2021. You know what I love about that, though, is I think one of the, I don't want to say the downfalls, but one of the challenges that I've experienced in any kind of online learning or learning in general is it tends to really be heavy towards the information and the understanding and the education. And then it kind of leaves you hanging as to how to actually implement that. Yeah. Okay, like I think I get it, but now what, right? And ultimately, and you know this, anybody who's kind of figured this out understands it, but it's like until you can match the information and the action, then ultimately you just save yourself the time if all you're going to do is try to ingest more information, right? Yeah. And so I love that as a focus is just like, okay, I get the principles, I understand the 800-gram challenge, like let's actually put it into practice.
Yeah, I mean, I love the principles. They were the way to sort it all out in my mind. So for me, it brought me clarity, to be perfectly honest. But in all honesty, people get the value out of part 2, you know?
Yeah, awesome. I don't know if you mentioned this, but if folks use a coupon code consistency, they will get a special treat. You will give them their New Year's resolution. So they don't even have to think about it. You'll just email them a random New Year's resolution.
Hopefully. It's more like a discount. Where do they sign up? There's going to be a link in the bio, right?
Yeah, there'll be a link in the show notes.
Awesome.
Yep. Okay. Protein, timing, and MPS. See, I already avoided saying it again. What do we need to understand here before we can dive into it?
Yeah, really quick brief on that last podcast. Like you said, we talked about digestion and absorption. It's not a perfect process. Pretty good. You can absorb more than 30 grams of protein at a time, but we have to understand it takes hours and it might not go all right to your biceps, right? But people want to know, like, how do I get the protein to my muscles? Because that's what I'm working on in the gym, right? And so these muscle gains, this adding new muscle, it requires this MPS, muscle protein synthesis. It's important to understand that all of the body's proteins are constantly being recycled. They're being degraded and they're being rebuilt all the time. And this includes your muscle. So we've got muscle protein synthesis going on, MPS, and then we also have muscle protein breakdown going on, MPB. And it's going on continuously.
You're just confusing us. MPS and MPB. Okay,
we're just going to stay with MPS from here on out.
Okay.
But this is going on continuously, like I said. And so it's this balance between the two that really determines how much muscle you have, you know, and to gain muscle, you are going to have more synthesis than breakdown. And so MPS is a good thing. But you know, because it's this continuous process of build up, break down, it's not like you just build your muscle and then it sort of sits there on a shelf indefinitely. It's constantly happening. And so we have to look at not just what happens at 1 hour out from your workout, not just happens 4 hours after your workout. What does it look like at 24 hours, 48 hours, 4 weeks from now? You know, if we really want to see what the net muscle mass change is. And we're going to come back to this. MPS increases with resistance training, no surprise. But this MPS, which is really a rate, we can think about it as, the new tissue built per hour per se, is elevated for at least 24 hours after training. I've seen it upwards of 48 hours plus. But this is one of the reasons why I hammered in the last podcast, and we'll do in this one as well, is that you have to nail this total quantity of protein per day. And I'm using a really easy example here because of math. Math is ahead.
Hashtag math.
Math is coming ahead, and it's a little oversimplified, but it's going to work for this purpose. Suppose that this MPS increases post-workout such that 15 grams of the protein in whatever you just had can be used for new muscle tissue per hour. Let's say you had that 30 grams of protein in a shake. We know it's not going all to your muscles, but for simplicity, let's say it is. Okay, that's going to get you 2 hours of MPS? Well, there's 24 hours in a day. So what's going to fuel this synthesis for the rest of the day? And yes, the rate is higher post-workout and then it starts to decline, but it's higher than where it started at true rest. And so the idea here is that I'm trying to hammer is this process is constantly going on. We're not just building new tissue 2 hours after the workout. If you don't have enough protein for this duration of the process, it doesn't matter how fast you are building it right after the workout. The net will still be a negative.
So what is the evidence, or what does the evidence say about total protein for muscle mass growth?
If I have my audience right, if we have our audience right, I think the majority of people, they're active. They might be doing some type of functional fitness, mixed modal with resistance training in their CrossFit type stuff. And this is, of course, why I throw out that 0.7 grams per pound of body weight per protein number. Certainly not perfect, but it is in line with research that finds, there is increased muscle mass with resistance training. So that's sort of step one. Like if you want to put on muscle mass and you aren't consistently at this 0.7 level, it doesn't matter if when you have the shake, we got this 24-hour increase of muscle protein synthesis going on. And I've worked with a lot of people, like consistency at that level is hard. It's even for me in terms of protein. I'm not bad at it, but I'm certainly not 100% consistent. And so I see this focus more on when I should be eating and not enough on how much I should be eating. Right. And then I think the next kind of wrinkle there is 0.7 isn't really optimized in the sense of, especially for people who are at this end of not just I want to increase some muscle mass or I want to get stronger with CrossFit, but the people that truly want to maximize their muscle mass gains, like, high volume, high intensity resistance training or competitive bodybuilders, they're going to be closer to this 1 gram per pound of body weight number. High volume CrossFitters that are really trying to add mass, they're going to be closer to this 1 gram per pound of body weight number. And again, you can kind of see how timing doesn't really matter if you aren't eating enough. If your total intake is closer to like a 0.8, 0.9 multiplier, but you need to be closer to a 1 gram multiplier, you're going to run out of protein throughout the 24 hours. And what's hard about this is, except for some high volume athletes, 1 gram per pound of body weight is pretty hard to stay consistent. It's a lot of protein. And I don't even see a ton of consistency at 0.7. So if you really want to maximize mass, we first need to get to 0.7, if not work our way up to 1 gram across the entire day before we even really think about timing.
We talked about it a little bit in the last episode, the difference or the adjustments maybe that need to be made if you were a vegetarian, say, or trying to get these numbers protein-wise in some other form than animal-based. How does that play into this conversation, this aim of muscle mass? I assume it's still possible, certainly, but how do you maybe differ your advice or your guidance if somebody comes to you and says, I'd like to put on some muscle mass, but I'm a vegetarian or I'm a vegan?
Yeah, I still start at those numbers, but they might find that, they kind of settle at a 0.8 or a 1.1, right? But I'm going to start at 0.7 and 1, partially because I'm just so into consistency, the magic word, right? And then if they're not really seeing their results and I see that they're eating a ton of, black beans or fibrous proteins, it might be the indication to increase it. Yeah.
So I feel like we had a similar question to this in the last one. Where did these numbers, this 20 to 30 grams, where are these coming from? And again, kind of the same question that I asked the last one was like, what were they aiming for? And maybe like, where was the misunderstanding, or where are we not understanding what the point of these numbers are?
Yeah, that kind of number, that protein gram range, 20 to 30 grams, there's studies that look at absorption, which we talked about, and now there's studies that look at MPS specifically. And there are a couple studies that suggest muscle protein synthesis, MPS, is maxed out.
I jinxed us, I think, at the start.
I know. When 20 grams of whey protein is consumed post-workout, and this is specifically data from Moore in 2009 and Wattard in 2014. But there's, of course, a few interesting things to point out about their studies. The first is the workouts in these studies were done in the fed state. Now, what does fed state mean? Okay, the researchers looked at the typical diets of these athletes before the experiment. They looked at all the calories, how much protein they were eating, and it turns out the athletes were eating already at the 0.7 gram level. Some of them were up to the one gram per pound of body weight level, meaning they were eating diets that had a pretty good amount of protein in the weeks and days before the study, including the breakfast meal right before the experiment. So why is this important? We're already looking at a population that's being consistent with the numbers that I see people aren't consistent at. Okay.
And again, just because it's a 24-hour process, it's not just a 2-hour, right? Okay.
Exactly. So they're being consistent for it. And we know that they're eating at a level where their body's probably not, worried about sending protein to other things, that they actually are eating enough protein that it can be sent to the muscles. This is an important distinction. And so we have to, to make these claims that these studies are relevant to you, it's like, well, is the test population like you? And if you're not consistent at 0.7 or 1.0 for my heavy muscle mass population that really wants to push that angle, okay, this study is not relevant to you. Okay. And again, many people I work with are not there yet. So first things first. Second thing, the studies were with lower body exercise routines of leg extension, leg curl type stuff. Now, I'm not putting down the researchers. I know I've got more of the functional fitness CrossFit type group. I'm not putting down the researchers. This stuff is really hard to do. I mean, they're taking muscle biopsies of these people every hour. We have to control for so many things. But the problem is, of course, how relevant is that to 100 pull-ups and squats for time, right? It's hard to say if that's really going to carry over to more CrossFit stuff. So we've got this other study by McNaughton in 2016 that actually found 40 grams of whey protein is what maximized MPS when upper body movements were included, like, again, Globo Gym type stuff, chest press, lat pull down. And this really shouldn't be a surprise, though. I mean, more muscle was used in that workout, right? So there's probably more muscle protein synthesis. And the other thing, the last thing that I want to point out about these studies, which I really didn't pick up on until more recently, is the different the different absolute values of these MPS rates. So we found that some research found the maximum value occurred when people had 20 grams of protein. We found another study where the maximum value occurred at 40 grams of protein. But what those maximal values are actually different from one another. One is 40% of the other, meaning it's like one study found that the maximum rate of driving a car was 50 miles an hour, and the other said the maximum found that it was 35 miles an hour. That's a difference, right? And so the amount of MPS, muscle protein synthesis, changed depending on the different exercise routines and the amount of protein given to the individual. And so maybe, just maybe, this process is dependent on a whole host of factors that just not the amount of protein you give is going to determine how fast that the body is putting down new muscle protein.
When you say that the maximum rate of MPS, what does that mean? And does that mean like beyond that, the protein is absorbed or digested differently than, et cetera? Like, what does that actually mean?
It means how fast the protein is taking on the protein from your muscle tissue.
Okay.
How quickly those amino acids are being absorbed into the protein. And there is a rate at which it levels off. It's like, you can accelerate to 50 miles an hour and then the car just stays at 50 miles an hour. Now, that doesn't mean it stops. It means that it might stay at 50 miles an hour for some time and continue to accumulate protein, right? But there is a rate at which it can keep absorbing protein, correct?
Got it.
And those rates, and that's what I was trying to point out, is those rates differ between studies as well. And that's quite interesting. If I'm really trying to build new protein, I'd like to be cruising along at 50 miles an hour, not 35.
Okay, so it seems like, or it sounds like the type of workout that we're looking at, that we're thinking about, right? Even so much as just the lower body to the upper body matters. What else maybe might affect the MPS? if we have any sense of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just a really important to point out. You pointed out the different types of workouts. We got to look at what we're doing in training. I'm going to guess that total volume matters. I'm going to guess that intensity matters. I mean, have all the protein shakes you want, but like if we're not going hard in the gym in terms of triggering MPS from kind of that trigger, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We need there to be the stimulus of the muscle being, worked and broken down to then build back to a higher level. And so this value of MPS likely changes based on whether or not you did full body, whether or not you did different parts of the body, more volume, more intensity, and then the food that you've had recently. Again, if you are not in a fed state, it is likely that the proteins will be distributed elsewhere besides your biceps just because proteins need to be used for other things. So we don't really have the details on, relative to you specifically based on all of what you've been eating and how hard you worked in this one workout and how was your intensity relative to your absolute max, like how much protein will maximize your specific rate. And so again, if this MPS is a 24-hour thing, we got to look back at, okay, what are we doing in terms of our training? Is that really maximizing kind of my efforts there? And then what total protein am I eating? People still want to know though, right? There's a lot of push for optimum. And so people want to know, what if I am that person, EC? I am that person who I'm eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. I am doing it consistently. I haven't missed more than one day in the last 4 months. I am crushing myself in the gym. I'm either competing in bodybuilding or I'm, regional level, although I don't even know what level there is anymore in terms of where we are at the games, but regional-ish level CrossFit or something like that. Then if I'm checking those boxes, then does timing matter is still kind of the ultimate question.
Yeah.
So some will suggest for that individual, it does matter that the rate of MPS, I said it's highest post-workout and maybe assuming that you always have enough protein around for 24 hours of MPS every single day, that maximizing this post-workout rate has value. But this is where we move to the theoretical. And for people that are doing all of those other things, training hard, protein, 1 gram, all that stuff, okay, now we're in the realm of, well, it's worth a shot. It's worth a shot. Maybe that you don't have to necessarily worry about sucking down the protein immediately upon finishing your last rep. But let's spread out those protein grams across the course of the day such that you always have a supply for this MPS, right? Now, the last thing I want to kind of tack on to that is that I wonder in this case of when I then suggest, okay, spread out your protein all at once, are we now micromanaging a process that doesn't matter? Stay with me here. If somebody's eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, it's typically somebody who's looking at 150 grams of protein a day. If I had to paint with a broad brush, they're typically closer to 200 grams. It's a kind of a larger male, generally, broad brush. So that's a lot of protein. And then given the fact that they have to sleep at some point, given the fact that they have to work out at some point, I'm assuming that they, have some other demands in their life, like a job, also considering the volume of food that they have to eat. Yep. It just sort of starts to break down that they're eating this stuff across the course of the day. You'd have to really work hard to come up with some schedule where you're doing all of those things, eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, but you always eat your protein 23 hours away from your last workout. We just sort of get to the realm of are we now worrying about something that kind of works out when you're just normal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if it requires a spreadsheet, it might have become too complicated.
Yeah, I mean, totally. It's just sort of if somebody has to eat 200 grams of protein in a day, you only eat so much protein at once. And then, like I said, you have these other life demands, you have to go to work, you have to work out. It's just going to work out that you're going to spread those grams across the day. And then it's okay, so I'm probably maximizing MPS in theory anyway.
Yeah, actually, that was going to be, my last questions as we start to wrap up here, which is does this actually matter? Is this one of those things that people have kind of gotten their, some people have gotten their sights on as being a silver bullet of some kind? And you just sort of alluded to it, which is Is it that silver bullet, and do we need to be paying that much attention to it?
I think that's a great question. Does it matter? I don't know that it does. I mean, first of all, we've moved into the theoretical, right? We've made the assumption that this person's doing all these other things consistently. And so it's just like, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters for 99.999% of people. I think it might matter, again, for the competitive bodybuilder who is actually putting, food on their table because of their profession, or, super high level athlete. But I think the other point there to bring up, and we did a whole podcast on it, was muscle mass versus strength. I think there's this assumption that I have more muscle mass and therefore I will be stronger, and not necessarily so either. You have to still be training like a madman in the arenas that you want to perform well to have that strength. And so this is where maybe the competitive bodybuilder matters, because maybe there isn't as much of that performance aspect, although there is to a degree. But it's just like, I think we're worrying about details that apply to very, very few people.
What else, if anything, on this subject is worth hitting on before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think I just want to kind of summarize big picture that between the two podcasts, hopefully the point that people are hearing is, I need to focus on getting a certain total amount of protein every day, and again, that 0.7 grams per pound is a great place to start. My heavy hitters might push up to 1 gram. And then guess what? You got to be looking at training hard. And, guess what else? You got to be looking at sleep so that you can train hard. And you got to repeat that for a long, long period of time, for sure. I do also want to say that I'm going to add a bonus on for my email subscribers, Patrick, that I'm going to address the idea, because this is one that people like to try to do as well, that can I combine this mass gain idea with intermittent fasting? So if you're interested in getting...
I was thinking about that, and I thought about that, and I was like, I'm not even going to open that can of worms, because that's another 20-minute conversation.
That is probably another 20-minute conversation.
So I'm happy to hear that. Good. Okay, so tell people more about it.
Yeah, I'll do a kind of a follow-up answer to that one. If they're not on my email list, they can get on my email list at optimizemenutrition.com/email, and that'll go out the day this podcast is released. Excellent.
All right, and one final reminder of the masterclass. New Year is coming. Started off strong with your masterclass, optimizemenutrition.com/masterclass. Use the coupon code consistency and you will get a bit of a discount and you will make EC happy. Beyond that, thank you everybody out there for listening. Have a happy new year. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Consistency Project.